The cabin lights flickered as the Boeing 747 lurched, rattling against winds so violent they sounded like 1,000 fists hammering the fuselage. Trays clattered. Babies cried. Passengers gripped armrests as lightning carved jagged scars across the night sky. Up front, Captain Robert Mitchell's voice, usually calm as stone, cracked over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts. We're in for—" His words cut off. A hollow thud followed. Then silence. In the cockpit, his body slumped sideways, motionless. Co-pilot James Wilson froze. His hands hovered over the controls as turbulence tossed the jet like a toy. His chest tightened. This storm was unlike anything he'd ever faced. He grabbed the radio, voice trembling, desperate. "This is Flight 327. The captain is unconscious. I repeat, captain is down. Is there any fighter pilot on board?" The words echoed through the cabin, sharp as glass. Heads turned. Whispers erupted. Fear spread like fire in dry grass. Somewhere in row 18, a woman lifted her head slowly, her eyes narrowing with grim recognition. Her name was Kesha Washington. And what happened next would shatter every prejudice, every doubt, every boundary of fear. But this was only the beginning. The cabin air felt thick, almost electric, as if the storm outside had seeped in through the aluminum walls. Passengers clutched each other, knuckles white, eyes darting toward the cockpit door that had slammed shut with an ominous click. Somewhere in that sealed space, the captain, the man they trusted with their lives, lay unconscious. And now, the question hung in the recycled air like a blade. Is there any fighter pilot on board? Row 18, seat C, a window seat. Kesha Washington sat still, her head resting lightly against the frame, eyes half closed. Her braids brushed against her navy blue hoodie, the kind you buy from an Air Force Base gift shop. To most passengers, she was invisible, just another traveler making her way across the Atlantic. But inside, her heart was pounding in a rhythm she knew too well, the drumbeat of crisis. She had flown through storms before, storms worse than this. Over Kandahar, over Baghdad, in places where the enemy wasn't the weather but tracer fire lighting up the night. She was 34 now, a retired Air Force colonel with over 500 hours in the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor. Yet here, among civilians who judged her not by wings but by skin and gender, she hesitated. Would they even believe her if she stood? Her gaze shifted across the aisle. Already she saw disbelief painted on faces. A businessman whispering into his phone, a mother clutching her child, an older couple crossing themselves as if prayer alone could hold a plane in the sky. Up front, James Wilson wiped sweat from his temple. The controls shuddered in his hands, the Boeing groaning under violent crosswinds. He had trained for emergencies, engine failure, fire, even hijackings. But not this. Not a storm this historic, not with his captain unconscious and 312 souls depending on him. He scanned the radar. Chaos. The storm cell stretched across the Atlantic like a black curtain. No clear path around it. His voice cracked again into the intercom. "If anyone on board has military flight experience, I need you now." And then his eyes flicked to the body slumped beside him. Captain Robert Mitchell, mentor, veteran, father figure, his breathing shallow, lips tinged gray. 3 rows ahead of Kesha, Richard Blackwood unbuckled with a huff. His expensive suit was still crisp despite the chaos, his Rolex catching stray flashes of lightning. A venture capitalist from Manhattan, Richard had built his fortune on deals where power meant everything and appearances mattered more than truth. He stood, turning toward the cabin like a self-appointed leader. "Listen, folks," he said, his voice dripping with authority. "They need a fighter pilot, not a passenger, not a tourist, someone who actually knows what they're doing." His gaze swept the rows, dismissive, calculating. It landed briefly on Kesha, dark-skinned, hoodie, quiet. He smirked and looked past her. She wasn't the type he imagined at the controls of anything more than a rental car. "Sit tight," he continued. "The airline surely has backup protocols. Let the professionals handle this." But his words didn't erase the fear in the air. If anything, they deepened it. Kesha's jaw tightened. She could hear the doubt, the disbelief, the prejudice unspoken but heavy. She had lived with it her whole career, superiors second-guessing her, peers whispering behind her back, strangers shocked to see her flight wings. She unbuckled slowly. The metallic click of the seatbelt was louder than it should have been. Heads turned. Richard noticed, eyebrows arching in disbelief. "You?" he scoffed. "Lady, please. This is life and death. Don't embarrass yourself." Kesha didn't flinch. She rose, steady despite the turbulence, her voice low but firm. "I'm a colonel, United States Air Force, former fighter pilot, and right now, your lives depend on me." The whispers turned to gasps. A ripple of disbelief spread across the cabin. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Then the plane lurched again, pitching downward violently. Passengers screamed, no more hesitation. She headed for the cockpit. Near the front, Dr. Patricia Chun adjusted her glasses, watching the scene unfold. A calm presence in chaos, Patricia was a neurosurgeon from San Francisco, though few here knew she had once been an Army medic in Iraq. She rose, calling out above the panic. "If she says she's a pilot, let her through. We don't have the luxury of doubt right now." Her words carried authority. Perhaps it was her tone, or possibly it was her calm. But passengers shifted aside, creating a narrow path. Richard sneered but said nothing. His silence was louder than words. The cockpit door opened with a hiss, revealing a storm-washed window where lightning painted the controls in ghostly blue. James Wilson's face lit with desperate relief as he saw Kesha. Are you the one?" he stammered. Kesha slid into the seat, her hands moving with muscle memory. "Colonel Washington, F-22 Raptors. I've flown worse storms than this." Wilson blinked, hope flickering. "Then God help us. Because I can't do this alone." Behind her, Patricia knelt beside Captain Mitchell, checking his pulse. "He's alive," she muttered, voice calm but tight. "But it's bad. He needs immediate stabilization." The storm roared, battering the plane like a predator testing prey. Kesha tightened her grip on the controls, eyes narrowing. "Then buckle in. We're going to do this my way." Back in the cabin, Richard seethed. He leaned toward the passengers, his voice sharp. "You people are insane. We're trusting her? Her? Do you really want your lives in the hands of someone like that?" A hush fell. Fear mingled with prejudice, passengers torn between desperation and doubt. A few nodded reluctantly. Others looked away, ashamed. Richard smiled, convinced he'd planted his seed. But then the intercom crackled, and Kesha's voice filled the cabin, steady, commanding, calm. "This is Colonel Washington speaking. I have control of the aircraft. We're going to hit turbulence harder than anything you've known. But if you trust me, if you follow my instructions, you will live." "Every single one of you." Silence. Then a child clapped softly. A mother whispered, "Thank you." For the first time, Richard's certainty cracked. The storm outside was only growing worse. Inside, the battle lines were drawn, courage against fear, competence against prejudice. And as lightning split the night sky, Kesha Washington prepared to defy not just the storm, but every doubt cast against her, but what neither she nor the passengers nor even the Pentagon knew yet. Was that the most challenging part, or had it not even begun? The cockpit smelled of sweat and ozone, the air sharp with static from the storm. Rain pounded the windshield like gunfire, streaks of water illuminated by forks of lightning. Every few seconds, the plane lurched, sending the instruments into a frenzied dance of red and amber warnings. Kesha Washington's hands moved with surgical precision over the controls. Her voice was clipped, steady, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding her veins. "James, what's our altitude?" she barked. 36,000 feet and falling," Wilson replied, knuckles white against the yoke. "Turbulence levels off the charts. Autopilot can't hold us steady." "Good," Kesha said. "We'll fly manually." Autopilot wasn't built for a beast like this. Wilson blinked. "Good?" The word didn't belong here. But the way she said it, calm, deliberate, sparked something in him. Hope, maybe. Behind them, Dr. Patricia Chun worked swiftly over Captain Mitchell. She had pulled the emergency med kit from the panel and now checked his vitals with a steadiness that calmed even the screaming instruments. "Pulse is weak but present," she said, glancing up. "Looks like a stroke or aneurysm." I can stabilize him temporarily, but he needs a hospital within the hour. Kesha didn't look away from the storm. Then we make this landing in under an hour. That's not a request. Patricia met her eyes and nodded once. The unspoken message was clear. You keep us in the air. I'll keep him alive. Another jolt shook the cabin. Passengers screamed, luggage tumbled from overhead bins. Somewhere in row 23, a baby wailed, the sound piercing through the chaos. The intercom crackled with static as Kesha keyed the mic. Passengers, this is Colonel Washington. We're experiencing heavy turbulence, but I'm in control. Stay seated, belts fastened. Do not panic. Her tone was military steel softened by calm reassurance. The kind of voice that cut through fear and made strangers trust her with their lives. In row 15, Richard Blackwood rolled his eyes, muttering just loud enough for others to hear. Control? She's going to kill us all. Mark my words. Unable to stay seated, Richard rose and stormed down the aisle toward the cockpit. A flight attendant tried to block him. Sir, you need to sit down. I will not sit, Richard snapped, his face flushed with arrogance. There is no way I'm trusting that woman with my life. I demand to speak with the co-pilot, the attendant pleaded. Please, sir, for your safety. But Richard shoved past, pounding on the cockpit door. Open up! You don't know what you're doing in there! Inside, James Wilson flinched at the pounding. Kesha didn't even blink. She spoke into the intercom again, her voice like ice. Mr. Blackwood, sit down. You interfere again, and I'll have you restrained. This is not a negotiation. It's survival. The cabin fell silent. Richard froze, caught between anger and fear. For the first time, people were looking at him with disgust, not Kesha. He slunk back to his seat, humiliated, but his eyes still burned with hatred. This wasn't over. Kesha turned back to the instruments. James, listen carefully. This storm isn't just turbulence, it's a supercell. We can't go through it straight. If we try, we'll tear apart, Wilson frowned. Then what's the plan? We can't go around it either. It stretches the entire Atlantic. Her lips tightened into a thin line. We go through it. But not like this. She tapped the radar, tracing her finger along the spiraling storm bands. Military technique. Controlled spiral descent. We angle the aircraft, descend in tight rotations, and use centrifugal force to stabilize against crosswinds. It's never been done in a 747, but it's the only way. Wilson stared at her like she was insane. You want to spin this plane? With 300 passengers? Not spin spiral, there's a difference. One kills us, the other saves us. He hesitated, searching her eyes. There was no fear there, only conviction. Slowly, he nodded. Then teach me. Kesha reached for the radio, flipping to a secure frequency burned into her memory from her Air Force days. Static filled the cabin, then a clipped voice answered, This is Atlantic Command. Identify yourself. Colonel Kesha Washington, United States Air Force, retired. I am piloting Flight 327, Boeing 747 through Storm Cell Charlie 9er. Captain incapacitated. Request immediate clearance and tactical guidance. Silence. Then a second voice, deeper, firmer. Colonel Washington, we know you. Pentagon confirms. Priority clearance granted. Godspeed. James's eyes widened. Patricia glanced up from the captain, startled. Even the passengers listening through the intercom gasped. Validation. Proof. And in row 15, Richard's face drained of color. The Pentagon knew her. The Pentagon trusted her. His protest suddenly felt small, pitiful. Kesha gripped the controls. James, on my mark. We bank left, pitch 10 degrees down, throttle steady. No panic, just precision. The plane tilted. Passengers screamed as the horizon spun sideways. Drinks spilled, luggage tumbled again. The Boeing roared, engines straining against gravity. Kesha's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Steady, steady. Feel the weight shift. Trust the spiral. Ride it. Don't fight it. Wilson followed her every word, hands shaking but obeying. Slowly, impossibly, the violent shudders of turbulence evened out into a rhythm. Still brutal but survivable. For a heartbeat, hope flickered, then alarms blared. The right engine coughed, sputtered, and went dark. Warning lights painted the cockpit blood red. James cursed. We lost engine 2! We can't sustain descent like this! Passengers screamed as the plane lurched again. Somewhere in the chaos, Richard shouted, "I told you!" "She's killing us!" Kesha's jaw clenched. She adjusted the controls, her mind racing. "It's not the engine, it's the intake. Heavy icing. James, activate the anti-ice system." "Now!" He scrambled, flipping switches. For agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, whoomp! The engine roared back to life, turbines clearing frost. Kesha exhaled sharply. "Never doubt me again." Wilson looked at her, humbled. "I won't." Behind them, Patricia pressed gauze against Captain Mitchell's temple, her voice a low murmur as if speaking to herself. "Stay with me, Captain. You've flown too many skies to end here." She looked up at Kesha. "You have 30 minutes, maybe less, before he crashes." "I need a hospital landing zone now." Kesha nodded grimly. "Then 30 minutes is all we'll take." The Boeing spiraled downward through lightning and chaos, a maneuver no civilian aircraft had ever dared attempt. Passengers clung to faith, strapped to a gamble born from combat skies. Kesha Washington's voice anchored them, calm against the storm, unflinching against doubt. Yet she knew the worst was still to come, because storms don't surrender easily, and neither did prejudice. And waiting on the ground was a final test that would decide not just survival, but legacy. The storm screamed around them, a monster alive with thunder and lightning. Each strike lit the cockpit like a war zone, the shadows of instruments flashing across Kesha's steady face. The Boeing 747 was no longer a passenger jet. It was a battered bird fighting tooth and claw against the sky itself. "James, bank now!" Kesha snapped. He pulled hard on the yoke. The massive plane tilted, engines roaring in protest. Passengers shrieked as the world outside tilted sideways, storm clouds spinning into a dizzying carousel of black and white. Kesha's grip was iron. Every movement she made was calculated, exact. The spiral descent was holding, but barely. The Boeing shuddered, a beast unaccustomed to being flown like a fighter jet. "Altitude?" she demanded. 22,000 and dropping fast!" Wilson shouted over the roar. "We're in the lower storm belt." Good, but not safe. Not yet. Behind them, Dr. Patricia Chun pressed adrenaline into Captain Mitchell's IV line. His chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. She whispered fiercely, "Don't you quit on me, Captain." "Not while she's fighting for you." The man groaned faintly, a spark of life. Patricia looked up, eyes meeting Kesha's. "You have minutes, maybe less. I can't hold him forever." Kesha nodded once. Her voice was steel. "Then we make every second count." In the cabin, chaos reigned. Oxygen masks dangled. Overhead bins rattled. Children screamed. And in the middle of it all, Richard Blackwood snapped. He ripped off his seatbelt, staggering into the aisle as the plane jolted downward. "This is madness!" he shouted, voice breaking. "She's going to kill us all." "We're listening to a—" Lightning struck the cabin, flashing blinding white. His words choked into silence as the aircraft dropped like a stone, tossing him against the seats. Passengers yelled, "Sit down!" Others pulled him back, furious now. One woman spat the words he had thrown at Kesha earlier, "Shut up and let the professional fly!" For the first time, Richard realized the cabin had turned against him. He was no longer their leader, their voice of reason. He was their shame. The spiral tightened. The storm roared louder. Then, suddenly, there was silence. The plane pierced through the eye of the storm. It was eerie, breathtaking. A hollow cylinder of calm surrounded them, walls of cloud rising like cathedral towers, lightning dancing silently along their edges. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. James gasped. "My God! I've never seen anything like this." Kesha's eyes narrowed. "Don't get comfortable. The second wall will hit harder than the first." Static crackled over the radio. A ground controller's voice bled through. "Flight 327, you're on course, but your descent speed is unsustainable. Abort spiral and level out." James looked at her, panic flickering. "They're telling us to stop. Maybe we should—" "No," Kesha cut him off. "They don't understand this storm. They're looking at data. I'm looking at reality. If we level out now, the crosswinds will tear us apart." James hesitated. His training screamed obedience to controllers. But then he looked at her, calm, fierce, unshaken, and he chose. "Your call, Colonel. Lead the way." Kesha gave the faintest nod. Then hold tight, because the devil's waiting on the other side. The moment they breached the far wall, the storm hit with savage fury. Wind slammed into the Boeing's side like a hammer, tilting the plane violently. Alarms wailed. Passengers screamed. Richard wailed audibly, his arrogance stripped down to raw fear. The plane rattled so hard it felt like bolts would tear free. Overhead lights exploded with sparks. Oxygen masks swung wildly, striking faces. James shouted, "We're losing control!" "Not yet," Kesha roared. She pulled hard, banking into the spiral, forcing the jet into a dive that made stomachs lurch. Her voice thundered through the intercom. "Everyone brace! Heads down, arms over!" The plane screamed downward, faster and faster. Captain Mitchell convulsed. Patricia pressed a hand on his chest, shouting for help. 2 flight attendants rushed in, holding equipment as she barked orders. "Epinephrine, now!" "Push it!" they complied. Mitchell gasped, his eyes flickering open for a fraction of a second. It wasn't enough, but it was hope. Patricia's own hand shook. But she forced herself to be calm. "Hold on, Captain. Just hold on." At 12,000 feet, the turbulence peaked. The Boeing tilted nearly vertical, left wing dipping perilously toward stall. The entire aircraft screamed. James cried out, "She won't hold! We're gonna roll!" "Not on my watch!" Kesha slammed the rudder, muscles straining. The plane groaned, metal shrieking as if it would tear apart. For an instant, the world spun, a blur of storm and steel. And then the wings leveled. Gasps filled the cabin. Some cried. Others prayed. But the spiral descent was working. They were punching through, surviving the impossible. Air traffic control broke through again. Voices urgent. "Flight 327, you are cleared for emergency landing at Dover Air Force Base. Runway 32, rescue crews on standby." James exhaled in relief. "Runway in sight." "We made it," Kesha's voice was grim. "Not yet. The crosswinds are brutal down low. If we botch this landing, all of this was for nothing." The runway lights appeared through the rain, glowing faintly in the darkness. The jet bucked wildly, fighting every inch of the approach. Kesha's knuckles whitened as she wrestled the yoke, coaxing the massive plane like a wild stallion. "Steady, steady," she muttered, more to herself than anyone. Wind slammed from the right. She countered. Rain blurred the windshield. She squinted, focused. "James, deploy flaps, 20 degrees. Now, flaps 20. The plane dropped sharply. Screams erupted in the cabin. Richard sobbed openly, clutching his armrest like a child. "Gear down," Kesha commanded. The landing gear extended with a deafening thud. The runway loomed closer, closer, and then touchdown. The wheels slammed onto the asphalt, sparks flying as the brakes screeched. The Boeing roared down the drenched runway, hydroplaning dangerously. For a terrifying second, it skidded sideways, then straightened. Kesha held it firm, slowing, until finally, mercifully, they stopped. Silence, and then an eruption of cheers. Kesha sat back, her chest rising and falling. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The storm was behind them. They were alive. Ground control crackled through the radio. "Colonel Washington, the Pentagon salutes you. You've just executed a maneuver never before attempted in commercial aviation. You didn't just save this flight, you've rewritten the manuals." James turned to her, awe written on his face. You just made history." Behind them, Patricia smiled faintly, exhausted but triumphant. "And you saved him too. The captain's stable." In the cabin, passengers wept, hugged, and clapped. Even those who had doubted her stared now with reverence. And Richard Blackwood? He slumped in silence, his face pale, his pride shattered. No one looked at him anymore. He was invisible. Kesha removed her headset, her voice steady but humble. "I just did my duty, same as I always have." But in that moment, in that storm, duty had become legend. The engines wound down to a low growl, the storm's fury fading into distant rumbles. Outside, flashing red and blue lights rushed toward them. Fire trucks, ambulances, rescue crews. The Boeing sat battered but unbroken, steaming against the drenched runway like a warship limping home from battle. Inside the cabin, silence lingered for a heartbeat, then erupted. Cheers, applause. People clapped until their hands stung. Some standing, some crying, others collapsing back into their seats in exhausted relief. Strangers hugged, whispered prayers of thanks, and sobbed openly. Kesha removed her headset, her palms damp, her arms trembling from the force of what she had endured. She leaned back for the first time in what felt like years. James turned toward her, eyes shining with something beyond respect, something like awe. "You didn't just land us. You fought the storm itself and won," she exhaled slowly. "We all fought it. Together." In the galley, Dr. Patricia Chun slumped against the wall, sweat streaking her hairline. The captain's breathing was shallow but steady now, his vitals no longer plunging. She had held him through the storm, just as Kesha had held the plane. A flight attendant whispered, voice thick with tears. "You saved him, Doctor." "You saved him." Patricia shook her head. "She did. I just followed her lead." She looked toward the cockpit, where Kesha sat framed by the faint glow of instruments. Her silhouette like that of a general after battle. Amid the applause, Richard Blackwood sat crumpled in his seat. The man who had shouted the loudest now trembled in silence, his expensive suit damp with sweat. Passengers who had once nodded at his arrogance now refused to look at him. Some glared openly. Others shook their heads in disgust. A woman across the aisle leaned close and whispered words that cut deeper than any storm. "You almost cost us our lives, and she saved them." Richard swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. For the first time in his life, no amount of money, power, or pride could erase the truth. He wasn't the leader here. He was the coward. When the doors opened, the rescue crew surged in, guiding passengers off. Many paused at the cockpit door, tears in their eyes. A soldier gripped Kesha's hand firmly. A mother bowed her head in gratitude. Children waved shyly as if meeting a legend. Reporters waited on the tarmac, cameras flashing, questions shouted. "Who landed the plane?" "How did you survive that descent?" Kesha stepped into the rain-soaked night, uniform damp, hair plastered, her eyes unyielding. And the truth spread like wildfire. It was her. The black female co-pilot whom many had doubted, dismissed, and disrespected. Colonel Kesha Washington. Within hours, the footage circled the globe. News anchors used words like miracle, unprecedented, heroism under fire. Aviation experts called the spiral descent a maneuver of genius. The Pentagon confirmed her record as a decorated Air Force pilot. Her name lit up headlines, not as a female pilot, not as a black co-pilot, but as the hero of Flight 327. Even Captain Mitchell, pale and weak, but conscious now, croaked from his hospital bed. I trusted her with my life, and she earned that trust 1,000 times over. When reporters swarmed Richard for comment, expecting the usual polished executive charm, he faltered. His lips trembled. He muttered excuses. I was scared, anyone would be, but no one believed him. The passengers had witnessed the truth. He was remembered not as the man of reason, but as the man who tried to strip a hero of her power in their darkest hour. In the court of public opinion, Richard Blackwood had fallen from grace, but for Kesha, the praise was secondary. She stood alone later that night, watching the storm clouds break apart, the stars peeking through. The world was quieter now. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the cockpit glass. She remembered every doubt, every side-eye glance, every whispered, not qualified she had endured on her journey. And now, against the storm itself, she had silenced them all, yet she didn't smile in triumph. She whispered instead to the night, "It shouldn't take surviving hell for them to see who I am." The wind carried her words away, but her truth remained. On that runway, in the aftermath of fear and fury, justice had not come through speeches or protests. It had come through action, through courage, through a woman who refused to be small, and because of her, 300 souls walked into the dawn. What happened on Flight 327 was more than a storm, more than an emergency landing. It was a mirror showing us the best and worst of humanity when fear strips away the mask. One man, Richard Blackwood, clung to his arrogance and prejudice, convinced that privilege gave him authority. But in the end, his voice held no power. His pride saved no lives. It only revealed the emptiness of judgment built on skin color, gender, and wealth. And then there was Kesha Washington. Calm, unshaken, prepared. A woman who had fought harder than most to earn her place, who carried scars of every doubt and dismissal she had endured. On that night, in the face of chaos, she proved a truth that prejudice can never erase. Skill, courage, and character are not bound by appearance. They are born in fire, tested under pressure, revealed when everything is on the line. Her spiral descent wasn't just a maneuver. It was a metaphor for breaking through storms, defying limitations, and refusing to let stereotypes steer the outcome of your life. And perhaps the greatest irony is this: the very voices that doubted her became the voices that applauded the loudest when she carried them to safety. So here is the question I leave with you. If this happened in your workplace, your school, or even on your street, would you recognize Kesha Washington among you? Or would you be the Richard Blackwood, too blinded by bias to see the hero standing in plain sight? Think about that, because storms will come in planes, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in daily life. And when they do, the question isn't who looks the part. The question is who can rise to the moment. Because authentic leadership, real heroism, knows no color, no gender, no privilege, only truth, only character. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this, about courage over prejudice, skill over arrogance, share this story. Comment below. What would you have done if you were on that plane? And never forget, sometimes the strongest wings belong to the people the world least expects.